Mercedes is betting big on electrification, but they're going about this process a little differently than some companies with a more diversified portfolio of hybrids, plug-in hybrids, performance AMG plug-in hybrids like the upcoming C63, dedicated platform battery electric vehicles like the EQS and EQS SUV, and converted ICE platform vehicles like the EQB, which is essentially a GLB with a big battery and an electric motor in it. Today we're taking a look at the latest and most expensive SUV in the electrified portfolio, the new EQS SUV. This is logically the SUV counterpart to the EQS sedan, and you could see this as Mercedes-Benz GLS reimagined for the electrified era. I suppose the first thing we should talk about is why Mercedes decided to reimagine the form of their SUV rather than simply taking a GLS and putting a big battery underneath the body. It all has to do with efficiency and range, of course, because there are two ways to get to long, usable, real-world range. You can improve efficiency, whether that's aerodynamic efficiency or drivetrain efficiency, etc., or you can just jam a big battery pack underneath the body. But as we've seen in the General Motors full-size trucks and likely the upcoming Hummer SUV, that only gets you so far because big batteries mean big curb weight. And even though this is pretty heavy, weighing in at up to about 6,400 pounds, it is significantly lighter than a Hummer EV or the Hummer SUV. And Mercedes' focus on aerodynamic efficiency and drivetrain efficiency means that this will get you 305 miles of EPA range, and not to tell the tale a little bit too early, but about 295 miles of real-world range if you get the rear-wheel drive model. And that all has to do with this swoopy aerodynamic profile to start with. We, of course, don't have a grille up here. We just find the little Mercedes stars that are illuminated up here. Big Mercedes logo, because only the cooling happens right down there. Big LED headlights in every model. These are active matrix LED lights, and they do a light show when you turn the car on, and they also can perform some additional functions highlighting things when you're out on the road. So if you veer over the lane line, it'll put a little arrow there. If you're driving with the adaptive cruise control and some of the other assistance systems on, and you turn your turn signal on, it will give you a little indication that you're going to move over and kind of highlight that to other traffic. But the big thing you'll notice up front is that this is not as boxy as a GLS, especially the roofline. It's about 5 inches lower, and everything is much sleeker here. The sleek aerodynamic design of the EQS SUV is especially noticeable in profile, where we certainly have a little bit of jelly bean up front and a bit more station wagon in the back than we find in the GLS. The GLS is especially upright, as is the GLB, but we don't find that in this for a pretty logical reason. Again, that aerodynamic mission. So instead of the very vertical hatch, we have more of a rounded shape right back here, much more flowing lines all the way around. And one interesting twist, we have these running boards that are really tightly integrated in an aerodynamic fashion with the vehicle, but they're not motorized. They're just fixed in place. I find that a little bit odd because you'll notice the roofline is definitely lower than the GLS. And that means that I'm not quite sure who these running boards are for because ground clearance is not especially high in the EQS SUV. And I don't find myself really needing to step on these to get in and out of the vehicle. I actually find myself more just rubbing my leg after those running boards are dirty, getting in and out. Shorter people should definitely keep this in mind because it's a pretty long reach, even for me, to get in and out without getting my pant leg dirty. Some of the aerodynamic design is obvious, like the swoopy profile, the arrow handles that pop in and out. Some are a little bit less obvious, like the EQS logo right here in this small triangle. That's in the lee of all this sheet metal, so it's kind of a gimme. It doesn't actually have the same aerodynamic drag as if they'd put the EQS, say, right down here. This little door, that's kind of an interesting one. This is so you can fill your windshield wiper fluid because the hood doesn't open. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And then we have side view mirrors that are pretty large, but they're tucked really close to the body, again, to help improve that aerodynamic profile. And that's critical because the EQS SUV is pretty big. It's just under 202 inches long, so about 5 inches shorter than the Mercedes-Benz GLS, but pretty close to a BMW X7 in terms of exterior dimensions, and a little bit bigger than a Tesla Model X, which is in many ways the only true competitor to the EQS. There are a number of other 2- and 3-row luxury SUVs in America, but when we're talking about 3-row luxury SUVs with a starting price well over $100,000, there are really just two, and that would be the Tesla and this Mercedes. Moving all the way around to the back, the flowing lines really make this a lot easier to clean, as I noticed this morning because it has been cold and rainy all week. We have the power button release for the rear hatch right there inside the Mercedes logo, just as you'd expect. Obviously, big power hatch there, but the opening and the rear end dimensions are certainly tighter than the GLS or the X7, and that's because the body wraps around, as you can see right there, towards the hatch. Full LED taillights, just as you'd expect, with amber turn signals right back there, and a design that's certainly in keeping with the rest of the Mercedes lineup. If you want to tow with your EQS SUV, you can get a hitch, and it's rated to tow up to 3,500 pounds when properly equipped. In a trick that we see in other Mercedes models, the turn signals are top-fired LEDs, and then what you're actually seeing here are the reflectors with lots of individual little elements inside to help give it some extra flair. The brake lights take things to the next level because they're actually located behind this rope-like light pipe that's very 3D inside that module. You'll actually see them as reflectors behind that inside the same module. At least for the moment, every version of the EQS SUV sold in the US is going to get the same battery pack. It's a 108.4 kilowatt-hour lithium-ion pack, a little bit larger than the one that we find in the EQS sedan. As you'd expect, it's located completely under the body in the EQS SUV, and it powers your choice of 2 different motor setups. Well, I guess you could say 3. This one is the base model. It's the rear-wheel drive version. We get a single motor in the back, producing 355 horsepower, 419 pound-feet of torque, and this one is known as the EQS SUV 450 Plus. If you want the 450 4MATIC, they add a motor up front, but they don't change the horsepower total. So still 355 horsepower, but torque goes up to 590 pound-feet of torque, logically because we get that other electric motor. If you get the EQS 580, that bumps power all the way up to 536 horsepower, 633 pound-feet of torque, and you could bet your buttons that there will be an EQS AMG version coming at some point later. As always, charge times are going to vary based on the kind of power you can feed your EV, but all the charging is going to happen behind this door on the rear quarter panel. We find an onboard 9.6 kilowatt level 2 AC charger that is a little bit slow in my opinion. I would have loved to have seen an 11 kilowatt onboard unit, or perhaps a 19 kilowatt unit like we are going to see in a number of upcoming EVs in the US starting in 2023. A little bit more important to some folks though is going to be the DC fast charge times available in the EQS. This has a peak charge rate of 200 kilowatts, which may not sound too exciting until you take a look at the consistent charge curve that we find in the EQS sedan and the EQS SUV. From 10% to 80%, this should average 153 to 155 kilowatts. That is pretty similar to the Lucid Air, and it's going to take you about the same kind of time to charge this as a result as some of those really fast charging EVs. This actually will charge a little bit faster on average, between 10% and 80%, than a Tesla Model S or Tesla Model X. And that's all due to the battery pack design. Now let's get to the question that so many of you were asking. What exactly lives under the hood of the EQS SUV? Not a lot is the answer. We have some coolant reservoirs over here. We have the 12-volt battery over there on that side. We have some portion of the high-voltage electronic systems right there just under the windshield, and then the compressor for the HVAC system right down there at the bottom. Steering rack, obviously, right down there below all of it. But in this space, absolutely nothing. And there is enough room there probably to put a 24-inch roller bag. In fact, they could have put a front trunk in here of a pretty healthy size because this hood is fairly long, fairly high, and fairly wide, but Mercedes chose not to. Instead, this is closed off, and it doesn't actually have any hood struts or a prop rod, although it does have the mounting points. So I suspect you might be able to put one on here if you could find the appropriate Mercedes part cross. The exact reason that Mercedes chose not to put a cargo area under here is a bit of a mystery, but we can make some logical assumptions. The first one is that Mercedes wanted greater parts commonality, and the EQS all-wheel drive versions would have a motor under there, really reducing the amount of space. They didn't want to make extra parts. There's also the question of serviceability. Plastic parts and things like that going on in here would make it a little bit more difficult to service some of those components if they ever needed that. And then lastly, there are crash test considerations. This is a hot button topic because I know a lot of EVs out there have large front trunks. But think about it, those vehicles are not crash tested with things in the front trunk according to the government standards or the IHS testing, so we don't really know how they will perform. And some car manufacturers have expressed concern about how crash structures would function if a non-deformable object was located right there between all of these critical crash structures in the vehicle. So things are going to be different whether you put your gym bag in here or you decided to load it up with concrete blocks or something like that, which sounds strange, but I have seen people do in EVs at Home Depot before. Again, the exact reason that Mercedes chose not to put a front trunk in the EQS is a bit of a mystery, but I suspect it's a combination of those various reasons. I understand where Mercedes was going with the hood that doesn't open, I guess you'd say, but living in a forest, I find it a bit inconvenient because there is quite a lot of forest located right here under this windshield wiper arm, lots and lots of it because it's been windy, and it's just really hard to get it out if you don't open the hood. As you'd expect out of a modern Mercedes, I found the front seats to be pretty comfortable, although I do find these seats a little bit less comfortable, a little bit less cushy than the ones that we find in the GLS. Also, the range of motion is a little bit different. But we do have a fairly upright driving position in here, a powered tilt telescopic steering column with a large range of motion, power extending thigh cushion right there, four-way adjustable headrest, the seat kinetic system available in here as well, and the front passenger seat has the same range of motion as the driver's seat. Both are heated and ventilated and three-way memory. One of the interesting things about the GLS is that this is available as a 2-row SUV or a 3-row SUV. Now, unfortunately, I was not able to get my hands on the 3-row version, so this is the model with 82 inches of combined legroom. Pretty generously sized second row back here. We have 4-zone automatic climate control, which is a really nice touch. And even with this front seat all the way back in its tracks, there is tons and tons of room back here. Lots of headroom as well, even though this has the 2-pane panoramic moonroof setup. Back here, I have about 3 inches of headroom left over on this side. The seats offer some recline functionality as well. For this functionality, the rear seats are powered, just as you'd expect out of a fancy Mercedes. You can slide the rear seats forward and backward, but the seat bottom cushion is not adjustable. And then you can put the seats in a quite upright position to help square off that cargo area in the rear, or a decently reclined position, but the rear seats don't move terribly quickly. The rear seat headrests are two-way adjustable, but they're not powered, even though the door controls look very much like the ones up front. We do, however, have little pillows right there on the headrests for the rear passengers. We also have a fold-down center armrest with some cup holders integrated in there, and 2 sets of latch anchors in just the outboard seats. Mercedes hides the child seat anchors underneath this section with the ISOFIX logo there. This gives it a very clean look, but this is not my favorite setup because this is kind of in the way when you're actually trying to use those latch anchor points, and the retention mechanism right here can end up kind of scraping your knuckles if you're not careful. Cargo capacity is going to vary based on the options that you select. If you get the 2-row model like this one, then we get 31 cubic feet behind the second row seats. If you get the 3-row model with the 3rd row folded, that drops down to 28 cubic feet. And if the 3rd row is up, you'll end up with just 7 cubic feet behind that 3rd row. And that's because of this really drastically sloping rear end design. Now, obviously, if you choose the optional 3rd row, a lot of this underfloor storage area is going to be occupied by the 3rd row seats themselves. As we look around this interior, keep in mind that it does have a few options, but this is not a fully loaded model. It is still pretty impressive, however. As we see in a lot of Mercedes models, there is tons of ambient lighting detail to go over. Big ambient lighting strip right up there by the controls for the large panoramic moonroof. One big panel here over the driver and front passengers' heads. And then that second panel back there for the second row, you can see that the second row seats also have the light pipes in the door, lots of ambient lighting everywhere. We have height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, 4-way adjustable headrests. Ambient lighting strips continue up here. There are lots of direct and indirect ambient lighting things, so there are actually some more than you can see right here during the day, shining on various different portions of the interior. Strip right there around that, piping right there, piping up on the door, even an ambient light strip right here in the seat back design that's a bit more visible at night. And then, of course, lighting filling out the footwells and the storage cubbies, things like that. Now, the big thing that this model does not have that you will see in a lot of EQS photos is the big hyperscreen setup in the dashboard, where we have an absolutely enormous screen here in the center and then a passenger screen on that side. This design looks a little bit more like the S-Class and C-Class, where the screen is part of this larger section that pulls up from the center console up there to the dashboard. As you can see, we have a large screen implementation of Apple CarPlay going on right here. It doesn't use the entire screen, however. This lower portion is reserved for the climate control functions and, of course, the home button for the system itself. Down here we have some other buttons, dynamic, forward, backward. These are the drive mode selections, so you can see it changes the drive mode on the screen. We then have a parking button there. The EQ button takes you over to some of the direct access functions for the electric vehicle system, so you can, for instance, open the charge door. It feels like it's a manual door, but it is actually powered. We also have a button to take you over to vehicle options in a clean fashion, hazard light button, fingerprint recognition option there, power button, mute button, and volume slider. Below that, we have a large storage area where we find 2 cup holders. These can be removed. I simply pull that, and then I can pull that entire module out of there if you don't want the cup holders. There's a Qi wireless charging mat. For most folks in America, that's going to be annoying because these cup holders will be in the way, and you know Americans love cup holders. I certainly do. We have 2 USB ports right there, USB-C. You can also close that area there with the piano black finish on top. In here, we find another storage area, 2 more USB ports. That's where my smartphone is currently plugged in, and this area is definitely huge. I can easily put that cup holder set up in there. Under the center console, we have yet more USB charge ports. They're a little bit difficult to see, but they are right over there. And then we have ambient lighting in that large storage area. You could definitely put purses and some medium-sized bags in there. Mercedes chose not to make the entire floor flat, so you can't see the driver's feet from the passenger side. But over here on the passenger side, we do have a pretty decently sized glove compartment. It's mostly a slot-style compartment. I was barely able to fit a 10-inch tablet computer inside. Larger ones probably would not fit. Moving back over here to the top of the dashboard, you can again see that ambient lighting strip and those air vents that are really well integrated into there. And if I scoot over to the driver's side air vent, we have the turbine style air vent that we've seen in other Mercedes models. A little bit different here though, you rotate the entire vent around to open and close. Not all Mercedes models have that particular action. And then down here you can see the optional Burmester audio speakers in this model. As you'd expect, the instrument cluster is a full LCD unit. It's controlled via some controls on the left side of the steering wheel over here, and you can change its design. You can select between a full map view and assistance-based view. This looks very much like other modern EVs where it shows you a diagram of the road and little blobs for the other cars that the car has detected. You can easily swap back to the primary home screen there, or hit the home button and then move on to those various different screens. There's a service screen, which is going to give you things like the distance to your next service. The classic look is the dial one there. We have this sort of interesting sport thing where we have this, I guess, UFO thing that's actually moving around there, showing you the G's, whether you're moving left, right, braking, or accelerating. And then there is also, if we move all the way over, an understated view, similar to what we find in other modern Mercedes models. Moving out from there, we find Mercedes' latest 3-spoke steering wheel design. Paddles on the back of the steering wheel. These are regen paddles. You can adjust the regen between 3 different levels. You can choose between strong, normal, and no recuperation. Even in the no recuperation mode, however, this does have a blended braking system, so putting your foot on the brake pedal is going to regen power back into the battery. You can also choose an automatic mode where it's going to use all the sensors around the vehicle to determine what traffic is doing in front of you and apply the regen braking based on that. Over here on this side, we have the controls for the adaptive cruise control system, and then over on this side, we have some infotainment controls, but we still don't have dedicated track forward and backward buttons. Be sure and sound off in the comment section and let me know, do you prefer this interior design or the one with the hyperscreen? I have to say, I love the hyperscreen because I love big LCDs. I also think it helps break up the dashboard a bit because this panel is really, really large. It does have a cool touch though. Yet more ambient lighting. Inside each of these little Mercedes logos is a light pipe, and that allows the light to shine through the logo. It is color adjustable. There's the color wheel mode, so you can change all the colors, have them animate, etc. It's very discreet. It really only shows up at night. During the day, they really just look white. Now it's time to get the EQS SUV out on the road. Obviously, we have to floor it first. This is when you'll notice that I am driving the single motor model. This is not slow at 6.5 seconds 0 to 60, so it feels pretty peppy. Also, the amount of power you get instantly is really nice compared to the average gasoline SUV. There's no waiting for transmission shifting or anything like that. You just stab the pedal and away you go. But this doesn't have the urgency that you find in the dual-motor EQS SUV or the EQS sedan, of course. And that would go not just for the 580, but also the dual-motor version of the regular EQS SUV. That will go 0 to 60 a little bit faster than this, but if you want to go 0 to 60 in 4.5 seconds, you need to get the 580. Now, if you want to go even faster than that, there are other options out there. The Rivian R1S is a little bit quicker, also the Tesla Model X, and then there's the absolute bonkers version of the Model X. Those are going to go quicker 0 to 60. But I don't think there's anything wrong with 4.5 seconds or even the 6.5 seconds that we find in this model. And I would say if you're interested in a solid EV with really great range and efficiency, you might really want to think twice about this single motor version, because in my range testing, this got us an honest to goodness 295 miles. We'll talk about that in just a second. Now, keep in mind this does weigh about 6,000 pounds, just a little bit over, and in the heaviest version, it's a cupcake shy of 6,500 pounds. So we're talking about a big, big, heavy SUV. And that's why in my braking test, even with the wide tires that we have on this model, it took 128 feet to stop from 60 miles an hour to 0. That is definitely a lengthy distance. Versus electric competitors, the stopping distance is pretty comparable. Versus gasoline competitors like a GLS or an X7, the stopping distances are a little long, so be sure and prepare in advance. When it comes to handling, I think the handling is really well done in the GLS, although obviously this is not going to handle as well as the EQS sedan. Again, keep in mind the curb weight. So if you were expecting Audi Q7, BMW X7, Mercedes GLS kind of handling, you might be disappointed. The center of gravity is really low, but we have a lot of weight in the vehicle, and we don't have the widest, grippiest tires because, of course, the efficiency concerns. But what we do have is standard four-wheel steering. So on winding roads like this, the EQS feels pretty nimble. Thankfully, the EQS doesn't just feel smaller than it really is, it turns smaller as well. The turning circle on this is just 36 feet, so the same as a Mercedes-Benz CLA, which is a very small Mercedes vehicle, and that's all thanks to that rear steering. But it also helps out the handling dynamics. This feels pretty nimble until you start pushing it a little harder, and then you're really going to notice the curb weight. So when it comes to the handling score, I'm going to have to give this a B. But keep in mind, there aren't very many options when it comes to electric three-row vehicles. It's a very limited set, but generally speaking, something like the Mercedes GLB, oddly enough, also in the three-row crossover electric segment, is going to feel a little bit more nimble than this, but in an entirely different way. It's also considerably smaller. Out on a rougher road like the one that I'm on here, ride quality is excellent thanks to the standard adaptive air suspension, but as you'd expect in a vehicle like this with a lot of curb weight, larger imperfections definitely come through into the cabin, and at times they can be a bit noisy when that happens also. That's simply because of the curb weight and the suspension travel that we find in the EQS SUV. This doesn't have as much suspension travel as something like a Rivian R1T or an R1S. Those have a very different mission, but their mission is to soak up those bigger bumps, especially on off-road courses. So you're really going to notice that difference between this and something like those comparable Rivians. The big thing to keep in mind is that if you're driving down most road surfaces, cobblestones, things like that, this is going to feel excellent. Even this little bump right here, it's going to feel pretty good. But if you come upon a large speed bump, you can't speed over it like you might be able to do in an R1T or an R1S. You do need to slow down, otherwise this will hit the bump stops because there's just not as much travel. Another area where the GLS really excels is in the cabin quietness department. I measured 69 decibels in here at 50 miles an hour, easily ranking this among the quietest vehicles that I have ever tested. The one trouble with making the EQS so quiet is that the pedestrian notification system somehow is really audible inside, and I'm surprised by that because wind noise is incredibly well controlled thanks to the aerodynamic profile. Road noise is also very well controlled, even though we have pretty wide tires on this EQS. But that pedestrian system, it sounds kind of like a bad wheel bearing when you're going under 30 miles an hour, and you can tell that it's not because the moment you go over 30 miles an hour, it turns off, and all of a sudden everything is fine. Now let's talk about efficiency. This is theoretically EPA rated for 305 miles, but the city score is a little bit higher than the highway score, so the combined ranking is that combination. In real-world driving out on a road trip, you should expect to get between 280 and 295 miles of real-world range. On my recent road trip range test, I had the heater going. It was 45 degrees outside. I still managed to get 295 miles out of this battery. That is really, really impressive, considering this is a big, heavy SUV with pretty wide tires. It's all down to the drivetrain efficiency and the extremely aerodynamic profile. The aerodynamic profile is very, very important versus a boxy SUV like something, I don't know, like the Rivian R1S. Keep in mind, I haven't been able to do a full range test on that. This is likely going to be more aerodynamic, certainly versus a Hummer or Hummer EV, or even some of the upcoming boxy set, I suspect. This will likely perform better. The upcoming EX90, it is pretty boxy compared to the EQS SUV. And I think that at 75 miles an hour, this is likely going to be more efficient. Obviously, you're going to have to wait for testing on that, but if you're going 70 to 75 miles an hour in this, you can get really, really excellent range. That will drop down by about 30 to 40 miles if you choose the all-wheel drive version. Some of that is due to the weight increase of the front electric motor, but there's also a little bit of loss in the front differential. Now, it can disconnect the front motor to help try and eliminate some of that, but there's always going to be more loss than if you didn't have that front motor and differential unit up front in the first place. Bottom line, out on the road, I'm definitely impressed with the efficiency in the EQS SUV, and unlike some others that have complained about the 0 to 60 performance in the rear-wheel drive model, I think it's a small price to pay for the increased efficiency and the fact that you really can go nearly 300 miles easily on a road trip in this, and then get a pretty quick top up in just 30 minutes and do another about 200 miles fairly easily. This is the kind of vehicle that with just a 30-minute detour could easily do 500 miles of real-world road trip range in a single day. And that's not something that we see in every EV out there, especially EVs of this size. Now, the downside, of course, is the price tag. So let's just dive into the pros and cons and then talk about the pricing realities of the EQS bearing in mind that there are some details that we still don't know for some reason. Now let's roll through the scores. The EQS SUV is certainly the kind of electric vehicle you can end up spending a lot of time in because of that 300-mile real-world range. So it's a good thing that it's pretty roomy on the inside and the seats are very comfortable. Unfortunately, I was not able to sample the 3-row model. Hopefully I'll be able to get my hands on one of those soon, but I can say that the second row is definitely comfortable for a longer journey, as is the driver's seat. I spent several hours at a time behind the wheel, absolutely no problem. Also, the EQS has really excellent efficiency scores. That's all part of that jelly bean-like profile. Some people might not like it, they might want something squarer, but if you do get something a bit boxier, remember that you're going to end up using more power to get you from A to B. I also think, this might be somewhat controversial, but I think that the Mercedes infotainment software is very attractive. I love the look and feel. I love the instrument cluster. It's highly configurable. It is not exactly intuitive. It is really more convoluted than intuitive in terms of its design, but I love the functionality and I'm willing to deal with that. The third row being optional is a bit of a bummer. I wish it had been standard because it is standard on a wide variety of the competition. We have a very extensive options list, which we're going to talk about in just a bit, and the price tag is pretty high. So keep that in mind. If you get carried away with options, you'll easily be up there around $150,000 and still have a vehicle that is definitely slow for this segment, and that is something that I had not expected out of Mercedes. Now, you will be able to upgrade the performance, but it looks like that's going to be a yearly subscription to get you a fairly modest improvement in performance. And until we see an AMG version of this on the scene, none of these options are going to be as swift as the Rivian and Tesla options. So with that out of the way, let's run through the pricing. As of the time that I'm filming this video, Mercedes has not given me complete details about certain package and option pricing on the EQS SUV, but it's certainly going to start higher than the average at $104,400. And it's going to go right on up to about the same as the top-end trim of the Tesla Model X, right around $160,000. Now, the base price is lower than the regular Tesla Model X, but you don't get all-wheel drive, and you certainly don't get that swift 0 to 60. The base Model X is EPA rated for 348 miles of range. Now, in real-world driving, it's going to be a lot closer to the rating that we see on the GLS because of the way that Tesla handles their fuel economy scores. But it is certainly going to be a lot faster, 3.8 seconds, 0 to 60. Now, the Model X is also available as a 5, 6, or 7-passenger SUV, so a little bit more in line with the GLS rather than having the third-row standard. Then we have the Rivian R1S. The R1S is available now, theoretically. People are actually buying them. The waitlist is pretty long, though, but it's going to be a lot less expensive, even if you end up paying more for it if you're trying to buy a used one or something like that. It starts at $78,000. That's going to be for the late availability dual motor model, and it goes on up to about $94,550. That is a fully loaded quad motor model that will get you 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. It's also going to give you 14.5 inches of ground clearance. If you're looking for essentially a luxury 3-row electric Range Rover, the Rivian R1S is exactly that at the moment. It'll give you 320 miles of range with the big battery, 260 miles of range with the base price and the smaller battery. The Rivian R1S really is just the SUV version of the R1T that I already had on the channel, so if you want to know more about the R1T, be sure and check out those videos. We don't know complete details on the R1S, and hopefully I'll be driving one early next year, but it's likely that some of my complaints about the R1T can be transferred onto the R1S, but some of them also do not apply at all. So some of my complaints around towing probably are going to be a little bit less important for the average R1S shopper, and I really love the fact that the R1S is very boxy and square. It has a very practical third row. I've been able to spend some time in it. It also has a big boxy cargo area, which is not what we find in the X or in the GLS. Sort of splitting the difference, I think, is going to be the upcoming 2024 Volvo EX90. We know that that model is going to start, quote unquote, under $80,000, so expect it to be $79,999, and it's going to go on up probably to over $100,000 most likely. There's still a lot of details we don't know about this Volvo, but we do know that on the inside it's about as roomy as the 3-row GLS. It is certainly a bit boxier in profile. It has a pretty healthy front trunk, something that we don't find in the GLS, and it has all of Volvo's latest active safety systems in it. It's really going to be the flagship of the Volvo line, which is a little bit of a different position than we really see in some of these other options. So Volvo appears to be throwing everything that they have into the EX90. The design looks excellent, etc., but it's not going to be on sale for at least a year after you're watching this video. You won't even be able to pre-order it in the United States until late 2023. Now, if you want a 3-row full electric vehicle, you don't have too many options other than these. You also have the upcoming VinFast VF9. I was really torn as to whether to put it on this chart or not. It is going to be on sale sooner than the EX90. It's probably going to be on sale next year. Pricing is a little bit lower, and its marketing position is not where we see the GLS. It's really targeting a lower end price tag. The base version with the battery lease is going to start under $60,000, so you could almost get 2 VinFast VF9s if you wanted to lease the battery versus one mid-range GLS. Now, it does appear pretty roomy. I have spent some time in the back seat of that at the auto show. If you want to know more details, apparently I will be driving one in early 2023, so be sure and stay tuned for that. I am personally very excited for the Kia EV9 and the VinFast VF9 because those are going to be much more affordable vehicles. The VinFast is intriguing because you'll be able to lease the battery, and if you're worried about battery lifetime and longevity, etc., that battery lease is really attractive. And for some folks, if you're going to keep your car only for 3 to 4 years, that still may be the best way to deal with a battery because it's going to be less expensive. On the other hand, VinFast is definitely an unknown quantity when it comes to electrification, and I've probably already spent a bit too much time talking about a VinFast in a video that's targeting Mercedes here. So if you're shopping for a luxury 3-row SUV, which one of these models should you get? I would actually say it's hard to go wrong with the Tesla Model X. Even though they've had a lot of troubles with those silly doors, I do think those are pretty dumb, to be honest. It also compromises second row headroom in a bit of a bad way, but it's hard to go wrong because it's an established player. We have a dedicated supercharging network that works very well. The range is definitely excellent, and the performance is absolutely bonkers. But if my money were on the line and I had the money, I would probably choose the GLS. It is incredibly comfortable, it's very efficient, and it's a very normal car, I guess you'd say. My second pick would be the Rivian R1S. If my own money were on the line, I would get that over the Tesla. That's mainly because of the extra focus on off-road ability, the fact that 7 seats are standard in the R1S. I really love the design, and I love the practicality of its boxy profile. The third row, I think, is definitely more comfortable than the one that we find in the Tesla Model X. Be sure and let me know what you think about that, and what would you pick if your own cash were on the line, bearing in mind that the top-end R1S, yes, you will have to wait for it, is going to be a lot less expensive than a GLS or a Model X as far as their base price goes. Talk to all of you later. Be sure and check out all the related content. You'll find some new stuff over at alexonautos.com. And of course, find us over at Facebook, where the channel has now been renamed the Auto Buyer's Guide channel. See all of you later.